in real time what it means to globalize the Intifada. It is what those protesters on Ivy League campuses in America have been calling for. It is what groups in New York and many other American cities on the streets have been calling for. This is what Intifada means. This is what we saw in the Second Intifada and the First Intifada in Israel. It's the use of whatever weapons you have to hand to kill.
A synagogue was attacked in Britain by a radical Islamist on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year. But of what concern is this to the average American? Take a look at this clip over here with Chris Cuomo talking to Douglas Murray. And Douglas Murray lays out exactly why this should be concerning to you, even though it's something that happened many miles away, potentially, why you should be concerned about this. So we'll watch this clip together and then talk about it. But first, hit that subscribe button over there in the corner. We'd love to stay in touch. Check this out.
To the American audience who says, it's not here, it doesn't really matter, it's different here. What do you say?
Well, first of all, it is here. It is here in America. And what we saw today on the festival of Yom Kippur in Manchester, which is probably about the second largest Jewish community in the UK, was in real time what it means to globalize the Intifada. It is what those protesters on Ivy League campuses in America have been calling for. It is what groups in New York and many other American cities on the streets have been calling for. This is what Intifada means. This is what we saw in the Second Intifada and the First Intifada in Israel. It's the use of whatever weapons you have to hand to kill. And that is what happened. You mentioned, Chris, that this man today, he's been named as Jihad al-Shami, which means the jihad from Syria. He was a Syrian migrant himself to the UK, 35 years old. You mentioned that if he'd have had access to even worse, more dangerous lethal weapons than he had, the attack could have been even more deadly. And you also mentioned just one particularly important detail there that's worth picking up. We don't know yet about the device that he was wearing, but there has been a precedent in previous jihadist attacks in the UK of the attackers wearing fake suicide vests. That happened in the 2017 London Bridge attack when three jihadists went across London Bridge slashing at people's throats, including a pregnant woman, and shouting Allahu Akbar. Those men were also wearing vests that looked like they were suicide vests and turned out not to be viable explosive vests. And so there is a pattern of that in this. You might ask, why would somebody wear a suicide vest-like thing that wasn't a suicide vest? And one answer is that that's also something that some jihadists have done in Britain and elsewhere, because among other things, they know that it leads to maximal terror, and it also is likely to lead to the police shooting them dead, doing a shoot to kill on them because of the threat of a detonation. So there's a pattern here, but obviously Britain is reeling from this. Jewish communities around the world, including in American cities, are reeling from this.
Yeah.
I hope that people really understand now, if they didn't before, what these calls to globalize the Intifada mean in reality.
I was shocked at how little coverage this got. Yes, it's another country, but I don't think that's the only reason it's kind of muted in its coverage here in America. What's your take?
Several things just very quickly. Of course, it has also come to America. Let's not forget the shootings of two young people in Washington, D.C. just a few months ago. They happened to be Israeli embassy staffers, but they were coming out of an event at a Jewish museum in Washington, D.C. when they were gunned down in cold blood by somebody screaming "Free Palestine." So yes, it is here. If you just walk to any synagogue in the US, walk to the synagogues in New York, every single one of them on a high holiday like this has massive police and other protection. Why is that? Because we've allowed this to ferment and grow inside all of our societies. You know, I've just got to push back on one thing we just heard there about the assimilation thing. It seems to me that if somebody comes to a country like Great Britain and their parents have called them jihad, and they have lived their life in the UK. It's quite hard for a country, even that had the best assimilating policies in the world, to assimilate people named jihad in a community which, to quote somebody I don't like quoting, but the one true thing he's ever said, Mehdi Hassan, the journalist, said 12 years ago in a truthful piece, he said, anti-Semitism among British Muslims is, quote, rife and commonplace. He said, every Muslim reading this will know that what I'm saying is true. He said, quote, it is our dirty little secret. When you see Muslims going through the streets of London for the last 2 years, from the day of October the 7th, 2023, celebrating the massacre of Jews in Israel, calling for jihad on the streets of Britain, when the British police say in response to that, the word jihad can mean lots of things. That's what the Metropolitan Police tweeted out. They said, jihad can mean lots of things. It can mean internal spiritual struggle, as if the bearded men on the streets of London calling for jihad were calling for an interpersonal spiritual struggle. We have been insane in countries like Britain, in our immigration policies, in our lax vetting policies, in failing to deport people who should never have been in the UK, and much, much more. And the result is you make sure that if you bring in the world's people, you also bring in the world's problems. And that includes there's anti-Semitism in all communities, as there is bigotry from all communities. But the Muslim communities have a particular problem with Jews. And until that is dealt with head on, you will see things like this that happen today happen more and more, and not just in Britain, but in America and elsewhere. We would deal with this if this was right-wing anti-Semitism or neo-Nazi anti-Semitism. Why don't we have the guts to deal with it when it comes from a minority community?
Because the growing in number and power. Douglas Murray, thank you very much. I appreciate your perspective as always. Jimmy.
And this is why it should be important to Americans too, because you have situations like this, attacks like this, that are not only happening in the UK, that are not only happening in some distant country overseas, but are actually taking place over here. We saw recently, like Douglas Murray correctly mentioned, we saw in Washington, D.C., where 2 people were murdered in cold blood, where someone was screaming free Palestine. And the more that we don't do anything about this, the more this is going to be something that spreads. And this is exactly what globalize the Intifada means. And so whether you are someone on college campus, or whether you're someone like Zohran Mamdani or a supporter of Zohran Mamdani who cannot condemn the idea of globalize the Intifada, this is what it means. I'm not saying that he's actively calling for the killing of Jews, but this is what globalize the Intifada looks like. There's no other way to look at that. And so if the Americans don't take proper precaution, that this sentiment is going to grow. And the truth is, even if you're not in the Jewish community and you're not, it's well, it doesn't affect me. You don't want to live in a place where there's groups that are not able to feel safe, like legitimately not able to feel safe, not in their mind imagine that they can feel safe, but that every synagogue on a high holiday has to have massive security. We have in our synagogue, every synagogue that I know has massive security, especially when there are when it's a day that's going to be known to be crowded. This is that the type of country that a person wants to live in? That has nothing to do with being Jewish or not. That has to be with living in a country where there is a group that is being targeted, where this is a reasonable expectation that if there weren't massive security, there'd be a lot more damage. So we're not talking about just feeling threatened out there in the ether that there's some force that's out to get me. We're talking about legitimate, practical circumstances that happen regularly, and that would happen a lot more if there weren't security measures already in place. So would you want to live in a society that tolerates that sort of thing? The truth is, at the end of the day, globalize the Intifada is not going to stop with the Jews. It always starts with the Jews, but never ends with the Jews. Do you want to be a part of a society that is open to that tolerates that grows that incubates that is that the type of country that we want to create? I don't think so. I don't think most people of goodwill think that. So we have to be vigilant when we hear these stories. I know there's a lot of stories going on in the world about all sorts of different things, and if it doesn't affect us directly, we tend to sort of tune it out because there's just too many things going on. But we have to be aware. We have to be aware of what's going on, what is actually taking place, not just in distant lands, but in our own country as well, and a sentiment that is growing and can potentially grow with bad immigration policies and bad policies overall. We need to make sure that we have our eye on the ball and are dealing with this head on as it grows. If you like this content overall, hit that subscribe button over there in the corner. We'd love to stay in touch. Take care.